Courtney Reese's final moments were caught on camera. She was standing outside a home in southeast Atlanta when a man walked toward her. Reports say she appeared frightened. Then came the words no mother should ever have to say. Please. Seconds later, the gunfire started. Not one shot. Not two. Courtney was shot repeatedly outside that home on Springside Drive. She was 32 years old, a mother of 4. And by the time first responders tried to save her, it was already too late. Her children would never see her walk back inside. Her family would never hear her voice again. And the man police later identified as the suspect, Derrick Rankins, did not stay. He ran. But this case did not end with Courtney lying outside that home. It got worse. Because 1 week later, police found Rankins in Stockbridge, Georgia. They came to arrest him. Then another gun went off. A task force officer was shot. A standoff followed. This is the part that makes Courtney Reese's story so painful. The camera recorded the danger, but it could not stop it. It caught the fear. It caught the approach. It caught the final seconds before a mother's life was taken. And today we are going to walk through what happened on Springside Drive, why police were searching for Derrick Rankins, and how the case ended before Courtney's family could ever hear a verdict. But first, drop your city, state, or country in the comments, because stories like Courtney's do not happen in some distant world. They happen in real neighborhoods to real families on ordinary nights. Courtney Reese was not just the woman in that clip. Her family called her Coco. And before the world knew how she died, for children knew her as the woman they still needed most. If you're into real, in-depth true crime stories, make sure you subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Because this case is one you won't forget.
Helicopter actually flew this 18-year APD veteran and investigator right here to Grady. This is all tied to a search warrant in Henry County. A regional task force led by U.S. Marshals executed this search warrant this morning in Stockbridge for Derrick Rankins. He is accused of shooting and killing Courtney Reese 1 week ago near Cleveland Avenue in Atlanta. Reese was a mother of 4. She was just 32 years old, shot at least 10 times, according to police. She had lost a sister just months ago.
Before Courtney Reese became a headline, she was simply Coco to the people who loved her. She was 32 years old, a mother of 4, 3 daughters ages 13, 9, and 6, and an 11-year-old son. To them, Courtney was not a news story. She was home. She was the voice they expected to hear, the mother they expected to come back inside, the person at the center of their daily lives. Her family remembered her as bright, energetic, and full of life, someone who did not fade into the background. Coco. That name belonged to a daughter, a sister, and a mother deeply loved by the people around her. And that is what violence stole first. Not just her life, her presence, her children's safety, her family's peace. And what makes it even more painful is that by August of 2024, Courtney's family had already been forced to stand beside one grave. By the time Courtney Reese was killed, her family had not even had enough time to breathe from the last funeral. Just months before Courtney's death, the Reese family had already lost another daughter. Her younger sister, Symetria Edwards McCord, was 29 years old. Reports identified Symetria as an Army veteran and a new nurse who had recently started working at Grady Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where her mother also worked. She was not someone standing still in life. She had served. She had studied. She had stepped into a profession built around caring for other people. Then, in May 2024, Symetria was killed in DeKalb County. She had been attending a family repast when gunfire erupted from several houses away. She was struck while standing among others in the crowd. What should have been a moment of family gathering became another scene of panic, another phone call, another loss that made no sense. That was May. Courtney was killed in August. Less than 3 months apart. One family. 2 daughters. Both gone because of gunfire. That is the part that makes Courtney's story even harder to carry. Her death did not land on a family that had been living in peace. It landed on people who were already wounded. People who had already stood together in grief. People who had already asked why one daughter was gone far too soon. And then, before that pain could settle into anything close to healing, they were forced to hear another name. Courtney. Another daughter. Another sister. Another mother. Another woman whose life was ended violently. For her father, James, the pain was almost impossible to put into words. He had already buried one daughter. Now he had to face the death of another. He later mourned publicly, saying Courtney did not deserve to go out that way. And he was right. No parent should bury one child. But to bury two daughters within months of each other is a kind of grief that does not move in a straight line. It stacks. It folds into itself. It follows the family into every room, every phone call, every gathering, every quiet hour when the house feels too silent. And this is where the tragedy becomes bigger than one night on Springside Drive. Because Courtney's death was not just another act of violence added to a news cycle. It struck a family that had already been hit once. It reopened a wound that had barely begun to close. It pulled everyone back into the same terrible routine. Calls, questions, police updates, funeral arrangements, memories, public mourning, and the kind of pain that makes people wonder how much one family can be expected to survive. The children were at the center of that pain too. They had already watched their family grieve Symmetria. They had already seen adults around them trying to understand a sudden death. Then in August, their own mother was taken. By the time police began naming a suspect, the story had already shifted from a random shooting to something much more personal. The man investigators were looking for was Derrick Rankins, 33 years old. He was not described as some unknown attacker who appeared out of nowhere and vanished into the night. Reports connected him to Courtney Reese. Some reports described the case as domestic violence related. Others indicated there had been an argument before the shooting. And that detail changes the whole weight of the story. Because when violence comes from someone connected to the victim, the fear is different. It is not just fear of a person with a weapon. It is fear of someone who may know your habits, your home, your family, your weaknesses, and the exact place where you can be found. There was a conflict. That conflict did not stay verbal. Courtney ended up outside a home on Springside Drive SE. A camera captured a man approaching her before the shots were fired. Some online discussion around the case claimed there may have been a private conflict or embarrassing information involved. Something Courtney knew, or something Derrick Rankins did not want exposed. But official reports did not publicly confirm a precise motive. So the safest way to say it is this. Whatever the argument was about, whatever had been said before the camera began recording, nothing could justify what happened next. Courtney was still a mother. She was still a daughter. She was still a sister. She was still a woman with 4 children depending on her to come back inside alive. That is why this part of the case feels so heavy. Because in many domestic violence-related killings, the final act does not begin at the moment the weapon is raised. It begins earlier, in the belief that one person has the right to control the other. The right to punish. The right to decide how the argument ends. The right to turn rejection, exposure, or anger into death. And while we do not know every private moment between Courtney and Rankins, we do know where the final public moment led. Courtney was outside. Rankins was later identified by police as the suspect. The encounter turned violent. The camera reportedly captured the approach. Courtney appeared frightened. She pleaded. Then the gunfire began. That is the part that strips away every excuse. Because in those final seconds, this was no longer about whatever argument may have happened before. It was no longer about who said what, who knew what, or who felt humiliated. It was about one person trying to live and another person allegedly bringing the violence directly to her. Think about how fast a normal evening can change. One moment, Courtney was still alive, still able to speak, still standing outside a home in the city where she had built her life. Her children were still mothered. Her family still had her. Her father still had one daughter left after already losing another. Then a man came toward her. And everything Courtney's family knew changed again. Reports say the clip lasted only seconds, but those seconds carried the weight of an entire life. A life that should have continued. A life that should have gone back inside. A life that should have seen her children grow older. And whatever was said before the camera started recording, the video captured the only thing that mattered in the end. Courtney was trying to survive, and the person approaching her had already made a choice. For police, the case had already moved into another phase. The man they believed responsible was no longer standing outside that home. He was not waiting at the scene. He had fled. And now the search was on. Derrick Rankins was wanted in connection with Courtney's killing on August 20th, 2024. What had started as a deadly shooting in southeast Atlanta had now become a fugitive case, and every hour that passed carried its own danger. Because police were not looking for someone accused of a minor offense. They were looking for a man wanted for murder. A man they believed had approached Courtney outside that home. A man connected to the violence captured in the final moments of her life. A man who had already shown, by the way Courtney died, how far the situation could go. That is why the days after Courtney's death were not quiet days. Not for her family. Not for her children. Not for the officers trying to find him. Not for anyone who understood what it meant for a murder suspect to still be out there. Courtney's loved ones were left with the worst kind of waiting. They had already lost her. That could not be reversed. But while they were grieving, they also had to live with the knowledge that the person police believed was responsible had not yet been taken into custody. There had been no court appearance. No formal answer. No moment where he was placed in front of the system and made to face what he was accused of doing. Just his name. His image. The warning that he was wanted. During that search, Courtney's story began moving through Atlanta. Her name was no longer only being spoken by relatives and friends. It was now tied to public alerts, reports, and a manhunt. People who had never met her were hearing that a mother of 4 had been killed. They were hearing that the suspect was someone connected to her. They were hearing that this was not just another shooting, but a domestic violence-related homicide. And while the public learned the details, Courtney's children were living the consequences. That is the part that can never be treated like background noise. A manhunt may move through police units, task forces, warrants, addresses, and reports. But behind every step of that search were 4 children who still did not have their mother. No arrest could bring her back. No public alert could undo what happened on Springside Drive. But finding Derrick Rankins mattered because it was the next step toward answers. Police needed him located. The family needed the fear of him being out there to end. And the city needed to know whether the man accused of killing Courtney was still moving from place to place, still beyond reach, and possibly still armed. Days passed. Then the search led outside Atlanta. About 1 week after Courtney was killed, authorities located Derrick Rankins in Stockbridge, Georgia, in Henry County. What happened next would not be a quiet arrest. It would not be the simple knock, handcuffs, and transport that families often imagine when they hear a suspect has been found. Instead, the case was about to explode into another violent scene. Law enforcement moved in to serve a warrant. Officers arrived expecting to take a murder suspect into custody. But the man they had come for was not ready to surrender peacefully. And within moments, Courtney Reese's case, already painful, already violent, already devastating, would take another dangerous turn. Because when officers closed in on Derrick Rankins, gunfire would break out again. 1 week after Courtney Reese was killed, the search ended not in a quiet arrest, not in a courtroom, not in a confession, but in another burst of gunfire. It was August 27, 2024. 7 days since Atlanta police identified Derrick Rankins as the man wanted in connection with the killing on Springside Drive SE. The search had now moved to Stockbridge, Georgia, in Henry County. Authorities had tracked him to a home on Linden Lane. According to official reports, members of the U.S. Marshals Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force, Henry County Police, the Georgia State Patrol, and Atlanta's Fugitive Unit were involved in the operation. They were not there for a conversation. They were there to serve a warrant and take a murder suspect into custody. The address was reported by Atlanta police as 404 Linden Lane. And from the outside, this should have been the moment the running stopped. The officers had found him. The warrant was there. The next step should have been arrest, booking, court, evidence, and a long legal road where Courtney's family might finally hear the case laid out in full. But that is not what happened. As officers approached the home, a shot was fired from inside. A member of the Marshals Task Force was hit. Atlanta police later reported that the officer suffered a non-life-threatening gunshot wound to the left arm. But even when a wound is not life-threatening, the danger in that moment is still real. One shot from inside a home can change an arrest operation instantly. It tells everyone outside that the person inside is not surrendering. It tells them there is a weapon. It tells them that the situation has moved from a warrant service to an active threat. Officers returned fire while working to get the wounded officer out of danger. That part matters, because at that moment, the focus was no longer only on arresting Derrick Rankins. It was also on saving the officer who had just been shot and preventing anyone else from being hit. The home on Linden Lane had become the second violent scene connected to Courtney's case. First, Springside Drive. Now, Stockbridge. First, Courtney. Now a task force officer. And still, Derrick Rankins was inside. The situation turned into a barricade. The Georgia State Patrol SWAT team was called to the scene. Tear gas was deployed. Officers moved carefully because they were dealing with a man wanted for murder, inside a house, with access to a firearm, after a law enforcement officer had already been wounded. This was no longer just the end of a manhunt. It was a standoff. For Courtney's family, the news must have carried a terrible mix of emotions. The man police had been searching for had been found. That was the part they had waited for. But instead of a peaceful arrest, there was more gunfire. More danger. More chaos. More people being hurt because of the same case that had already taken Courtney from her children. The scene stretched as officers worked to bring it under control. Eventually, law enforcement entered the home. Inside, Derrick Rankins was found in the attic. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, he had at least one gunshot wound, and a rifle was found with him. Medical personnel attempted to treat him, but he was pronounced dead. And just like that, the man accused of killing Courtney Reese was gone too. There would be no booking photo after arrest. No first court appearance. No trial date. No jury. No guilty plea. No sentencing hearing. No moment where Courtney's father, mother, siblings, or children could sit in a courtroom and watch the person accused of taking her life answer before the law. The search was over, but it did not end with the clean closure people often expect. It ended in an attic. It ended with a rifle. It ended after an officer had been shot. It ended with Derrick Rankins dead before he could ever stand trial for what police believed he did on Springside Drive. And that left Courtney's family in a painful place. Because yes, the man police were looking for could no longer run. He could no longer hurt Courtney. He could no longer be taken into custody because that moment had passed. But his death did not bring Courtney back. It did not erase the 27 seconds that reportedly captured her final moments. It did not give her children their mother again. It did not give her family the courtroom ending they may have expected when his name was released as the suspect. Courtney was still gone. Her children were still motherless. Her family was still facing the second violent loss of a daughter in the same year. And just like that, the man accused of killing Courtney Reese was dead. But for Courtney's family, that did not mean the story was over. The search for Derrick Rankins ended in Stockbridge. But Courtney Reese's case never reached the place many families expect after a murder arrest warrant is issued. There was no murder trial. No conviction. No sentencing. No courtroom where prosecutors could walk through the evidence step by step. No day where Courtney's family could sit behind the state and hear her name spoken in front of a judge. No moment where the person accused of killing her had to stand before a jury and answer for what police believed happened on Springside Drive. Derrick Rankins died before the case could get there. And that leaves a different kind of pain. Because when people hear that a suspect is dead, some may think that means the story is finished. They may think that means the family has closure. They may think the danger is gone, so the grief can finally settle. But grief does not work like that. A trial can never bring a loved one back. But sometimes, it gives the family a place to put their pain. A place to say, this is who she was. This is what was taken. This is what her children lost. Courtney's family never got that version of justice. Instead, they got an ending that felt abrupt. Courtney was killed on August 20th, 2024. 1 week later, the man police identified as the suspect was dead after a standoff in Stockbridge. And between those two dates was a family trying to survive the kind of loss that no legal outcome could truly repair. That is what makes this case feel unfinished. Not because police did not identify a suspect. Not because there was no search. Not because the case was ignored. But because the person accused of taking Courtney's life never had to sit in court while her family faced him. Courtney Reese was not just the woman in a 27-second clip. She was not only the victim on Springside Drive. She was not only the mother whose final moments were recorded but not stopped. She was Coco. That was the name her family knew. The name that belonged to home, laughter, food, family gatherings, inside jokes, and everyday love. And that is what makes the ending so painful. Because when Courtney died, the world did not just lose a 32-year-old woman. For children lost the person at the center of their lives. And those children are now left with a story no child should ever have to carry. A story that begins with their mother alive outside a home and ends with her gone before anyone could save her. Courtney should have been there the next morning. She should have been there to wake them up, ask about school, correct them when they needed it, laugh with them when the day got easier, and stand beside them as they grew. She should have been there for birthdays, graduations, family photos, hard conversations, proud moments, and all the small pieces of motherhood that children do not fully understand until they are gone. But violence took that from them. And for Courtney's family, this was not the first loss of the year. Her younger sister, Symetria Edwards McCord, had already been killed months earlier. Her father had already known what it felt like to bury a daughter. Her family had already stood in grief once. Then Courtney was taken too. 2 sisters. 2 daughters. Both gone in the same year. There are some losses a family can speak about. And there are others that sit so deep, words never seem strong enough. Courtney's father said she did not deserve to go out like that. And no one who hears this story could honestly disagree. She did not deserve those final seconds. And even though the man police accused would never stand trial, Courtney's life still deserves to be spoken about with care. Not only because of how she died, but because of who she was before that night. Coco. A mother. A daughter. A sister. A woman loved by people who will now spend the rest of their lives remembering her in past tense. If Courtney's story stayed with you, do not let it disappear as just another headline. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Because every victim deserves more than silence, and every story we tell here is a reminder that someone's life mattered. This was Courtney Reese's story, and at Dark Trace Crime Stories, we remember the names, not just the crime.